This video is brought to you by the 3-Minute Board Game patrons. Keep us independent by supporting us on Patreon. Kia ora koutou, and welcome to this special video where I talk about 10 lessons I learned while getting my very first board game published. Now, Red Dust Rebellion is my very first game I've designed that's been formally published, but it is far from my very first design. In fact, I've been tinkering with making board games since I was a kid, and I imagine quite a few people watching this video are the same. I also have a second game I've designed coming to Kickstarter in Q4 of 2024, and that game is Shadow Moon Syndicates. And hopefully I've taken some of the lessons I've learned from making Red Dust Rebellion and put them into that game. These 10 tips are very much based on my own personal experience making a board game. And no one's experiences are the same. So these aren't 10 golden rules or 10 commandments, they're just 10 things I'd like to reflect on based on my experience. And hopefully through my experiences and my pains, my trials and tribulations, you might pick out a gem of wisdom that helps you on your own design journey. So without further delay, let's get on to the list. The first point I want to make is that when you start out on this board game design journey, you are going to be terrible at it. You are not going to be an expert, and that's fine. It is fine to be bad at board game design when you start out. If you go out thinking that you have all the answers from day one and the first game idea that popped into your head is absolutely certified genius that needs to be patented, you're going to have a very bad time. You need to be open-minded. You need to read. You need to play games. You need to listen to other game designers and other people in the field and learn from them. Open your ears, hear what they have to say, synergize it, and then use that to create your own visions. Because if you just close your ears, walk out there and think that you are king shit from day one, you're going to fail. And you're going to fail hard, and you're going to fail in a very embarrassing way. One of the really important things I had with Red Dust Rebellion was listening to the expertise of the people that were around me, that were helping me become a better designer. In particular, I had Jason Carr, who was the line editor for the coin games for GMT, there as a mentor for me all the way through the process. And I learned a lot from him. He didn't tell me what to do with the game. He would just give me advice and steer me and keep me on track and help me become a better designer. And there's so many resources out there that can help you improve. There's board game artisan groups in lots of different countries. And here's a couple of other sites you can go to and get their perspective. Jamie Stegmaier from Stonemaier Games has an amazing blog on this kind of stuff as well. There is tons of advice and guidance and expertise out there. So the key takeaway from this first point is don't go in thinking you know everything from day one, because you don't. My second bit of advice is to start small. Don't actually start designing a board game. Pick out a game that you really like in your current catalog and make a little expansion for it. Make a character for a game or an add-on, just to sort of play within the game system without having to build a system from scratch. So one of the first things I did back in the day was make characters for Battlestar Galactica, for characters that weren't in any of the official supplements. So these are still up on Board Game Geek somewhere in the Battlestar Galactica files. I made these back in about 2008 or 9 or so. But what they were, it was a nice safe sandbox. I didn't have to build a system from the ground up. I could play around with the established rules from the game itself, and then I could just tweak the characters within them. And then playtest them with my group and playtest them with my friends, and have that sort of design experience without having to start from a blank bit of paper and go, what game do I want to build from scratch? I think this is the way to go to start off, is to just pick something and make house rules with it, make an expansion, play around with it, and then test it with your friends. And if that works, then you're learning lessons as you go along, and it's a lot easier to start doing something this scale and this easy to test and this easy to sort of share with people than it is to dive straight into a board game design from scratch. So yeah, that's my advice for this bit. Start small. You don't actually need to design Gloomhaven as your very first game or Europa Universalis. You can just start making mods for a game that you love. My third bit of advice is prototype, and prototype as soon as you practically can. As soon as you can get something down on paper, do it. And for me, what I start doing is I use a whiteboard. I am a big fan of whiteboarding when it comes to prototyping, because say we're making a game called Space Cats on the Moon, and I'm like, here's a moon, here's Earth, here's like a space station or whatever, and we're gonna divide things up there, and then here's some influence cubes, because we're using influence cubes in the game, and boom, I've got a wee map that I can fiddle about with and do stuff straight off the bat. And if I make mistakes, or if I'm just coming up with things on the fly, I erase them, and I keep putting stuff on the whiteboard until I've got a reasonable way into the design. Then I make one on paper, and I don't do a fancy one until far, far later in the process. Whiteboards are fantastic, especially portable ones like this, for getting early prototypes made. And also just for bits, just grab stuff from random games. Red Dust Rebellion's score track, for example, for almost its entire existence, was the score track from 51st State. And the cubes, I just ordered some from online or scavenged some from my other coin games. Make it out of bits, but get the prototype built, get something done. Use Magic the Gathering cards and sleeves and write on bits of white paper and just chuck them in there if you're going to make cards. Get stuff built really, really quickly, because the sooner you're playing the game, the better it is. Things, if they stay an idea concept for too long, and you don't get them on paper, you'll never get to the next stage, because it's idea to prototype to develop. And you've got to get to this prototype stage as soon as possible. And make rubbish ones. Just make them out of crappy material, because in that first stage of design, you're going to be throwing stuff in the bin and redoing it, throwing it in the bin, redoing it. And that's why whiteboards, little bits of paper, random components, just don't make bespoke stuff until you're really, really comfortable with the design and tested it quite a bit. Go cheap, go simple, and go dry erase. The fourth point I'd like to make is make something fun and something that you can be passionate about. One of the reasons I picked Red Dust Rebellion to make as a game is because it combined my love of two things. Three things really. One is science fiction, the second one is Mars in particular, and the third one is counterinsurgencies. So my academic background is in military history and defense studies, and I used to teach a paper at university about the ethics of armed conflict. So this stuff, plus my love for science fiction, and in particular science fiction about independence from Earth, all blended into make this game something I was very passionate and interested in. And because you're going to be spending so much time with this game, playing it over and over, looking at the materials or the theme that you've picked for the game, it needs to be something, especially first off, that you are really, really interested in, that you're passionate about, that will keep your attention for the duration. Because a game can take a lot of time to go from concept to being published. Red Dust Rebellion, it was 7 years. That's a little bit extreme, but it brings me to my point in my experience, which is you need something that will keep your interest for that entire time. So if you're not into badminton, probably making a board game about badminton's not a great idea. Point 5. Now, one of the most ridiculous things I see new designers say is, oh, should I self-publish this or should I get a publisher to do it? When they haven't even got a game prototype built yet. Like, don't get ahead of yourself. Don't think about marketing and selling the game until you actually have a game to market and sell. Board games are not really get-rich-quick schemes. It's very unlikely that straight out of the gate, you're going to have a game that is such hot fire that publishers are going to snap it up, or that you're going to put it on Kickstarter and it will make multiple millions of dollars straight off the bat. This has happened to some people. So I'm not saying it's impossible, it's just very, very unlikely. Instead of focusing on marketing and selling the game before the game is finished, I would focus on getting a good game that you can show people, that you can develop, that you can grow, that then you can show off once you've got something to show off. Because ideas are cheap. There are so many people out there with great board game ideas, but what people really want to see is a finished or close to finished board game that they can play, that they can sink their teeth into, and that they can go, yeah, I can see this being fun. And for me, both my games were picked up by publishers without me really having to sell them, in no small part to the fact that my prototype seemed very complete and very well-rounded, and that when I spoke about the game, they could clearly see that I had a clear vision about what the game was about and where I wanted to take it. And that comes from focusing on the game first. And that's the lesson here. Focus on making a good game, and if the game is good enough, the marketing, the deals, all that kind of stuff, they will somewhat take care of themselves. Another thing that's really important is don't think you need to do all the work yourself. Or at least don't try to do all the work yourself. Get a developer.
Developers, 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 developers. Developers, 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 developers.
Like, the developers for Red Dust Rebellion, both Adam and Joe, were so valuable to making that design work. They ran a lot of playtesting, Joe designed the solo mode, and they gave me tons and tons of feedback that allowed me to tweak and change the design. And they did two things that were really, really, really important. The first one is they maintained a bit of a distance between me and some of the playtesters, so they could collate all the feedback and then give me the pressure points without me being immediately there. Because sometimes you can get a little drawn into the moment when you're hearing feedback as a designer right as the game's going on. And the second really big thing is act as a sounding board. They became as familiar with the game as I was, and they could point out things and go, hey, this isn't quite working. How would you feel about this idea? And they'd pitch something to me and I might take it on board and do it. Or I might go, ooh, that's inspired me to do something else. Having a good developer is a really, really big part of making a good board game, in my opinion. And for Shadow Moon Syndicates, I've been really blessed to have Sam McDonald of the West Kingdom Games and the Circadian Games, the designer of those, come on board as my developer. And he's been fantastic to bounce ideas off. He's come up with his own ideas to help improve the game as well. And it's been this fantastic collaborative process. Getting a good developer just makes the experience so much better. It makes the game better because you get someone who's on your wavelength, but who will challenge you, who will make you make a better game by giving you the right prompts, by giving you the right feedback, and empowering you to become a better designer. And I think of every single point I'm going to make in this video, getting a great developer is the single most important one. Even if that developer is your friend and they're doing it pro bono, just get someone on board in that function. It'll dramatically improve your game. Because sometimes, as a designer, you cannot see the forest for the trees. Now, there's an old adage out there that says that you should hear what playtesters are saying and take that on board, but don't listen to their solutions. And there's a fair bit of wisdom to be said in that. My personal approach is a little bit different. I like to take all of the feedback on board and hear what they're saying, and even look at their solutions. But then I like to give a lot of time to think and reflect on that before making changes. I like to cogitate it over, sleep on it, and then go, okay, how are we going to improve the game? And then immediately test that. So take on the feedback, think, can this improve the game by changing something? If it does, make the change, and then get into testing it straight away. And that should be a somewhat constant cycle of having playtesting, getting the feedback, going through it with a fine-tooth comb, deciding what changes, if any, need to be made, and then personally testing the game and playing it yourself a couple of times to see how that works. And I think that's the cycle and cadence that works best for me as a designer, is get the feedback, think about it, make any changes, and then immediately test. It's okay to take time thinking, but once you've made that change, test it straight away. Now, the next bit of advice also deals with feedback, and it's about having design pillars for your games. Fundamental things that make the game what it is. Now, there's a cliche that you're supposed to kill your darlings when making a design, and I don't actually agree with that. I think there are some things that when you're making a design, you have very specifically in mind that are the key to making that design what it is. And if you take all the feedback on board from people, and if you keep shifting your design based on the last bit of feedback you get, you'll end up with something that's been essentially focus grouped to death. Sometimes you need to have values and core concepts that you hold onto to make the game what it is. So for example, with Red Dust Rebellion, it was the setting. Nothing I changed in that game, or no change I would approve in that game, should stop being logically consistent with the idea of an insurrection on Mars 250 odd years from now. If there was a rule suggestion, no matter how good, and it didn't feel right for Mars, I would discard it. Shadow Moon Syndicates has a couple of these pillars as well. And when we went through the design process, Sam and I, the developer, had a very good conversation over what was really important to me and really mattered and was core of the design, and what we could fix and change and alter. And I put down 3 big anchors and went, no, these are my design pillars. One was how the cards work and all the interactions therein. Second one was that it is fundamentally an area control game, but an area control game where influence is removed from the board constantly. And the final one was that there is an end game played with cards you have set aside that you pick out on the final turn and start playing, so that the final turn is far faster and far more dramatic. And we changed just about everything else in the game. And we changed those things for the better. But those 3 things were the identity of Shadow Moon Syndicates. And if we started changing those too much, we'd be just making another game. So case in point, you're designing Catan. You're sitting down in 95, you're designing Catan, and someone walks up to you and goes, I don't like dice. Well, do you get rid of dice from the game, which is your core allocation system? Or do you just go, no, actually the dice are a pretty important part of the game. Someone goes, I don't like hexagons. Do you get rid of those? There are some things in a game that make the game what they are. Identify what those are for your game and hold on to them. Because otherwise you could just get pulled by feedback back and forth and end up with basically a game that's a pile of goop. Point number 9. It takes an army to make a board game. Now, sure, there are some people out there who will self-publish a game. They'll do all the art, they'll do everything themselves, but by and large, that's not how it happens. You'll have a cast of people that will be involved in the process, whether it's from the publisher, whether it's their marketing people, it's the artists involved. You can have multiple artists. Some might work on cards, some might work on the board. We had 2 artists for Red Dust Rebellion, for example. Marcos worked on the cards and Terry worked on the board and the graphic design and layout. So you've got this ensemble cast, developers as well, playtesters, all these people involved in the process. And you need to first treat them all with respect, and secondly, try to get the best you can out of each and every one of them. Think of yourself as the designer being the director of a movie. And so the publisher's the producer. They're the ones with the money and bringing all that stuff, but they're somewhat trusting you to bring your vision out. And your developer and your playtesters, they're like your cast. You need to manage them well. You need to look after them. And sometimes I've been a little bit neglectful because I've had a lot on my mind and I'm a little bit of a driven personality. And I can sometimes be a bit brusque with people. And that has caused me some problems through various parts of the game design, is just being a little blunt when I probably should have been more diplomatic. And that's something I want to get better at as I go along with this, is just remembering that, yeah, I've got a vision of what the game is, but I should not be a prima donna about that. I should spend more time trying to get the best out of everyone involved. That's not to say I'm a complete tyrant to work with, but I definitely could have been better at times. And I think that's really important when you go into this process is, remember you're part of a team. You're going to be the designer, you're going to be somewhat the star of the show or the director of the show, but there are a ton of other people involved in the process, and you need to take their feelings, their desires, their workflow, their interests and their capacity into account when you're doing things. Not everyone works to the same schedule, not everyone works with the same intensity, and not everyone is as single-minded about your game as you're going to be, which is, understandable. Most other people have other things in their lives, and when you're designing a board game and trying to get it over the line, you can become quite mono and quite obsessed over it, and you just need to manage that a little. Especially I needed to manage that a little as well. So to sum this one up, sometimes I needed to chill the fuck out a bit more and not be quite so much of an auteur director type. And that brings us to the final point, which is be patient. Board games are like fine cheeses and fine wines. They will take time. As I said, Red Dust Rebellion has taken 7 years to get from woe to go. And Shadow Moon Syndicates I designed in 2019, and it's coming to Kickstarter in 2024. Now, a large part of the issue with both those games was the pandemic. Kind of threw a spanner in the works of just about everyone involved in the board game industry and delayed a lot of projects. And both Red Dust Rebellion and Shadow Moon Syndicates, got at least a year or two bumped onto their times because of the pandemic and all the problems with manufacturing in China. And that was outside my control. Now, a thing about board game design, especially with the contract I've got with GMT, is they pay me once the board game sells. So I have received $0 for Red Dust Rebellion yet because they haven't charged for all the pre-orders. So you aren't getting paid while the game's getting delayed, which can be quite tense, especially if you're thinking, you've got some financial problems. Like a little while back, we had an issue with our roof that needed replacing, and it cost us a fortune. And if Red Dust Rebellion hadn't been delayed by 2 years, I probably would have been in a much better position to pay for that roof. But you've got to be patient. That is just the nature of the game. It's the nature of the industry. You will get paid if you're publishing a game when it comes out, and then you'll get a trickle of royalties after that point. You can't really rely on it unless you've sold a game like a Wingspan or a Ticket to Ride that's consistently bringing in money. You can't rely on it to arrive on schedule because so many things will delay your game. It can be little things, problems with the printer, problems, a thing could pop up in playtesting, and you just need to go, be calm about it. Know that everyone involved in the project wants it to work, because everyone involved in all these projects, they want to get it over the line just as much as you do. You've just got to go, let's be patient, let's be calm. And I've learnt a lot about not worrying about timelines. I mean, I get my stuff done when I need it to get done, so if I'm given timeline by the publisher, I go, boom, I get that in. But if things are pushed back for other reasons, you just kind of got to go, that's just how it is. So my final bit of advice is, once you've got a game in the works, just be patient with everyone. It probably will happen. It will probably come out, unless something really horrible and dramatic happens, in which case I'm sorry. But 7 years it took from Red Dust Rebellion to go from concept to publish, and yeah, it's taught me the value of being patient. So that's my 10 bits of advice for being a board game designer, 10 lessons I've learned. They were very personal ones. As I say, I'm not sure they're hugely applicable to everyone out there. I'm not sure anyone's going to have quite the same experience I did making Red Dust Rebellion and Shadow Moon Syndicates. I'm not sure anyone has exactly the same personality as me and will have these kind of things. But I hope there's something in there you find interesting or valuable or insightful, or just makes you curious. And any other questions about what I've learned through this experience, please leave them in the comments below. And until next time, take care, everyone.